24 out of 25. That is how many supermarket honey samples failed independent authenticity testing in the UK in 2024. Every single sample from British beekeepers passed. There is a sentence hidden on the back of millions of honey jars in British supermarkets right now. It is printed small, placed on the side or the rear of the label, and it reads, "Blend of EU and non-EU honeys." That phrase is legal. It is permitted under UK food regulations. And according to independent testing, it is also one of the clearest signals that what is inside the jar may not be honey at all. In November 2024, the UK branch of the Honey Authenticity Network sent 30 samples of honey for testing at the Selvia Research Institute in Estonia, 5 from British beekeepers and 25 from major UK retailers. The result? 24 of the 25 retail samples were flagged as suspicious. Every single beekeeper sample was genuine. The Guardian reported it. The World Beekeeping Awards cancelled its honey prize entirely that year, citing concerns about fraud in the global supply chain so severe that authentic samples could not be reliably verified. Honey is the third most adulterated food product in the world. It is being bulked out with cheap rice syrup, corn syrup, and bioengineered syrups designed specifically to evade detection. And the brands selling it know exactly which 4 words to print on the label to stay within the law while telling you nothing. Here are 8 of them, and at the end, 3 jars that are actually what they say they are. 1. Rowse Squeezy Clear Honey, the market leader, with an origin it won't name. Rowse is the UK's biggest honey brand. It sits at eye level in every major supermarket. The bear-shaped squeezy bottle is one of the most recognised pieces of food packaging in the country, and the flagship product, Rowse Squeezy Clear Honey, is labelled as a blend of non-EU honeys. Non-EU means the specific countries do not have to be disclosed. The UK imports around 38,000 tonnes of honey from China every year. China is the world's largest honey producer and the country most associated with industrial honey adulteration. Between 2021 and 2022, the European Commission's Anti-Fraud Office tested honey entering the EU and found that 74% of suspicious consignments originated from China. Honey exported from the UK to the EU during that same period had a 100% suspicion rate. Rowse says it tests every batch independently before release and screens for sugar syrup adulteration. British beekeepers, the Honey Authenticity Network, and independent scientists have spent years trying to get brands like Rowse to disclose the countries their honey actually comes from. Rowse declines to do so for its blended range, citing commercial sensitivity. Rowse is owned by Valeo Foods, an Irish private equity-backed food conglomerate. Valeo is estimated to account for around 72% of the UK honey market and to pack approximately 85% of all supermarket own brand honey in Britain. Which means the problem you are reading about right now runs almost entirely through one company. And if the market leader won't tell you where its honey comes from, it should surprise nobody that the supermarkets it supplies follow the same approach. That single fact, one company, 72% of the market, is worth pausing on. Valeo Foods does not appear on the front of any jar, but it is the entity that determines what most of the honey in British supermarkets actually is, where it comes from, and what goes into it. When Valeo declines to disclose countries of origin for its blended range, that decision applies simultaneously to Rowse, to Tesco own brand, to Sainsbury's own brand, to Asda own brand, and to several other supermarket lines it packs. Independent testing organisations have been calling for country of origin disclosure on blended honey for years. The argument against it, commercial sensitivity, is, in practice, the argument that consumers should not be told where their food comes from because that information might affect their purchasing decisions. That is not a food safety argument. It is a market protection argument. And every brand you are about to hear follows the same logic, because in most cases it is the same company making the same decision under a different label. 2. Tesco Clear Honey, Valeo in a different jar. Tesco sells honey from 69 pence a jar. Genuine honey, produced by bees, extracted by beekeepers and packed without adulteration, cannot be sold at 69 pence a jar and return a profit. That gap between price and reality is where the fraud lives. Tesco's own brand Clear Honey, sold under the Stockwell and Cumberland label, is labelled as a blend of EU and non-EU honeys. The country of origin is printed on the side of the jar, not the front. Tesco is one of Valeo's primary supermarket clients. The honey in this jar, in all likelihood, passed through the same supply chain, the same packing facility, and the same non-disclosure framework as the Rowse squeezy bear on the shelf beside it. When supermarkets have been challenged on selling honey later found to be adulterated, their standard response has been that they can trace the product from the beekeeper to the customer. Independent analysts point out that tracing 10,000 squeezy bears packed from 300-kilogram drums imported from multiple countries is not what most consumers understand traceability to mean. And if Tesco's own brand is part of a system that makes cheap honey commercially viable by obscuring its origin, the next 5 brands are all running the same play. 3. Sainsbury's own brand. Same supply chain, different logo. Only 5% of honey sold in UK supermarkets comes from British hives. Sainsbury's own brand is not among that 5%. Sainsbury's own brand Clear Honey carries the same blend of EU and non-EU honeys labelling as Tesco's. The British Honey Importers and Packers Association maintains that the vast majority of honey sold in the UK is genuine, and that the DNA testing used by the Honey Authenticity Network is not independently validated for enforcement. That disagreement about testing methodology is real, but it does not explain why the companies resisting stricter testing are also the ones resisting country of origin disclosure. If the honey is genuine, naming the countries it came from costs nothing. 4. Asda own brand honey. Cheap, untraced, unlabeled. Lynn Ingram, chair of the Honey Authenticity Network, UK, described adulterated honey as widely available in big supermarkets and said the market was being flooded by cheap imports that undercut genuine producers to the point of driving British beekeepers out of business. Those same beekeepers also run pollination contracts for UK farmers. When they go out of business, the pollination goes with them. Asda's standard own brand honey follows the same pattern as Tesco and Sainsbury's. Blended, non-EU origin not disclosed, priced at a level that cannot reflect genuine honey production costs. The UK is the second largest importer of honey by volume in all of Europe. The cheaper the jar, the longer and more opaque the supply chain behind it. Adulteration does not happen because packers are lazy. It happens because the economics of cheap blended honey make it profitable to add syrup and almost impossible to get caught. 5. Aldi own brand. The discount price problem. In 2015, 14% of honey entering the EU was flagged as potentially fraudulent. By 2022, that figure was 46%. It did not rise because beekeepers got lazier. It rose because the syrups used for adulteration got better at evading the old tests. Aldi's honey range includes blended products carrying the standard non-EU labeling. The price point is among the lowest in the market. To compete on price with honey, you buy from the cheapest available sources. The cheapest available sources are the ones with the highest fraud rates. The maths is uncomfortable, but it is not complicated. 6. Lidl own brand honey. Non-EU blends at budget prices. In 2024, the World Beekeeping Awards cancelled their honey prize entirely. Not because of a dispute, because they could no longer verify whether any of the entries were real honey. Lidl's standard honey mirrors the pattern across all budget supermarket-owned brands. Non-EU blended origin, no country-by-country disclosure, pricing that reflects mass importation rather than genuine beekeeping. Just 14% of honey consumed in the UK comes from British hives. When the international body representing beekeepers globally cannot verify the authenticity of honey entered in competition, the idea that a discount retailer is doing so at scale on jars priced below £1 does not hold up. 7. Hilltop honey. The artisan brand built on blended imports. Hilltop honey has grown rapidly to become one of the UK's largest honey brands and a significant own-label supplier to supermarkets. Its branding is premium and artisan, clean typography, countryside imagery, an emphasis on quality and natural production. Its founder has said the company invests heavily in authenticity testing, using multiple analytical methods to verify sugar profiles and pollen origin. That is a more thorough position than many competitors publicly state. But Hilltop's core range still relies on blended imported honey carrying the same non-EU labeling as the supermarket-owned brands it also packs. Artisan design applied to undisclosed blended honey from high adulteration risk origins is still undisclosed blended honey. The jar looking different from the Tesco own brand does not make it different. And if the artisan-looking brand is drawing from the same pool as everyone else, the final entry is the one where the stakes are highest, where consumers are paying the most and getting deceived the most. 8. Manuka honey without UMF certification. The most expensive fraud on the shelf. More Manuka honey is sold around the world every year than New Zealand bees are physically capable of producing. The maths is not close. Manuka honey is sold as a premium health product. It commands prices of £5, £10, sometimes £20 a jar, based on its antibacterial properties, its narrow geographical origin. It can only come from the manuka bush in New Zealand, and its perceived therapeutic value. The fraud works by adding artificial dihydroxyacetone to standard honey, which converts to methyl glyoxal, the compound that gives genuine manuka its antibacterial activity, and then labeling the result as manuka. Without the right certification, a consumer cannot tell the difference. The certification to look for is the UMF mark, Unique Manuka Factor, issued by the UMF Honey Association in New Zealand. A jar carrying a UMF number means the producer is licensed, the product has been tested, and it meets New Zealand government standards for genuine monofloral manuka. A jar of manuka honey without a UMF mark has no independently verified connection to a manuka bush. You are paying a premium for a label. Here is the pattern across all 8. A legal label designed to tell you as little as possible. A price that cannot reflect genuine production, and a system in which fraud is difficult to detect, almost never prosecuted, and therefore economically rational. Only 3 things can break that: transparency about origin, independent verification, and a price that reflects what real honey actually costs. These 3 options meet those tests. What to buy instead? Rowse British Oxfordshire Wildflower Honey is a different product entirely from the Rowse Squeezy Bear. It is single origin British honey, clearly labelled from a specific region. In the HAN-UK testing, the one retail sample that passed was British honey. All 5 beekeeper samples passed. British honey, when it genuinely is British and genuinely single origin, is at a fraction of the risk of blended non-EU imports. Rowse's British range is widely available and clearly distinguished from its blended range on the label. It costs significantly more. That is correct. Local British beekeeper honey is the most reliable option available. In the HAN-UK test, every single beekeeper sample was genuine. Not most, every one. A local beekeeper knows exactly which hives their honey came from and what the bees foraged on. You cannot adulterate a batch when the person selling it extracted it themselves. The British Beekeepers Association runs a Find a Local Honey tool at bbka.org.uk. Enter your postcode and it returns registered beekeepers selling direct to consumers in your area, at farmers markets, farm gates, or by post. Prices typically run from £5 to £12 for a 340-gram jar. That is more than a supermarket jar. It is also more than a supermarket jar actually costs to produce, honestly, which is the point. On any honey label, 3 things are worth checking. Does it name a country, not a region, not a continent, a country? Does the price reflect what genuine production costs? And for manuka specifically, is there a UMF number from a licensed producer? Not just the word manuka, not MGO, without a UMF mark, but a certified UMF number. For manuka honey specifically, look for the UMF certification mark and a UMF number on the front of the jar. UMF 10 plus or above indicates a meaningful level of tested antibacterial activity from a genuinely licensed New Zealand producer. Without it, the word manuka on the label is decoration. Rowse's own manuka range carries UMF certification. So do several New Zealand brands available in UK health food shops. The certification is the product. Everything else is packaging. Honey is one of the oldest foods in human history. What is sold in most UK supermarkets under that name is in tens of thousands of tons per year, not honey. It is syrup in a jar with a bee on the front. The label tells you everything you need to know. You just need to know what to look for. That's it for today's food check. But here's the problem. Once you start looking closely at supermarket food, you realize this isn't just happening with honey. If you want to see what we uncovered next, make sure you're subscribed to Food Check UK because we're exposing products most shoppers trust every day. And I'd like to hear from you too. What honey do you normally buy? And has anything in this video changed your mind? Let me know in the comments below. Now click the video on your screen because the next product we investigated is even more surprising.